Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm reviewing a 27-inch 1440p 240Hz gaming monitor from Acer that I bought for just $300 US. That's right, 1440p 240Hz refresh rate, and it cost me just $300 brand new. That monitor is the Acer Nitro XV272U W2BMIIPRX. Or the XV272UW2 for short. Maybe one day Acer will realize that a monitor product name with 15 letters and numbers, not including Nitro, is actually bad and makes it hard to remember or search for the product. But anyway, before we get into it, today's video is brought to you by LG and their Amazon Prime Day sales. For a limited time, you can get $150 off the 27GR95QE OLED gaming monitor, bringing the price down to an excellent $850. We loved this display when we first reviewed it earlier this year with its 27-inch 1440p 240Hz OLED panel, providing an awesome, super fast HDR experience for all types of gaming. LG are also offering $400 off the super ultra-wide 49GR85DC, which packs a 49-inch 240Hz VA LCD with display HDR 1000 support. To learn more and grab these great displays at fantastic prices, check the links in the video description. When I say I bought this for $300 US, that is technically true, although it's not the full story. I bought it from Amazon US and the item itself cost $300, but then I had to pay $156 US in shipping and taxes to import it to Australia. So that instantly makes it not a very good deal for Australians, but our wonderful Patreon and FloatPlay members allow us to buy stuff like this and spend $150 on shipping without having to worry too much. The other factor here is that $300 appears to have been a promotional price, maybe for the first batch of units that went on sale, as this does appear to be a very new display. The current MSRP is $400 US, which may change by the time you're watching this video, but I guess it does illustrate that Acer can and maybe will discount this to $300 in the future. Still, even at $400, it's one of the cheapest 1440p 240Hz monitors on the market, especially as the Gigabyte M27QX continues to be MIA. The specs for this product are pretty reasonable. 27-inch 2560 by 1440 IPS LCD panel with the maximum refresh rate of 240Hz, supporting adaptive sync technology. Acer are claiming 99% sRGB coverage, although it's actually a wide gamut monitor, and there's also display HDR 400 certification. However, don't expect true HDR here, as this display lacks any real HDR capable hardware. The Nitro is a very basic monitor when it comes to design. The build quality is not particularly impressive, with standard black plastic used throughout and a few visibly untidy seams. I've definitely seen worse, but on visual inspection it's also quite clear this is a budget monitor. Perhaps the most obvious sign of that is the piddly stand with its thin pillar and circular base. There's a bit of wobble here, not the sturdiest design going around, that's for sure. Surprisingly, Acer have managed to cram all of height, tilt, swivel and pivot support into this stand, including an interesting swivel arrangement where the entire base rotates 360 degrees. The functionality is all there, it just lacks that extra touch that we see from higher end products, which is fine at this price point. Port selection includes one DisplayPort 1.4 and two HDMI 2.1 ports. Yes, they are listed as HDMI 2.1, which most other budget 1440p 240Hz monitors don't have. But there's an issue here. They are fake HDMI 2.1. You'll see on the product page that the HDMI ports are limited to just 144Hz, and after checking ourselves, we found no FRL support. So these HDMI 2.1 ports are not using any of the higher bandwidth capabilities that HDMI 2.1 is supposed to bring. Acer are kind of misleading customers here, as allowed by the HDMI forum, with their awful HDMI 2.0 can actually be called HDMI 2.1 if you want to guidelines. For all intents and purposes, these are HDMI 2.0 ports. There's also a headphone jack, but no other ports, so no USB ports and therefore no firmware update support. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle, which is a positive, but the feature support is average. We do get crosshairs and a few other things, but limited color controls and not much else. No KVM or anything like that to be found here. Before talking about motion performance, I did want to touch on Acer's quality control for this monitor. My unit arrived with a sporadic backlight defect that seems to rear its head at random times, presenting as a flicker in the leftmost column of edge-lit LEDs. Across about a week of usage so far, it's happened 3 times for a short period, so about 95% of the time it's fine, then occasionally that left backlight column would flicker. Normally, I'd point this out and say maybe it's a one-off or an issue from shipping at 13,000 kilometers, but I checked the reviews for this monitor on Amazon and found a person that had the same sort of issue. This person's monitor is way worse than mine, with a more pronounced flickering column in the center left of the panel, but it appears to be the same type of defect. Both my monitor and this person's monitor should have been caught in a quality control process, so buying one could be a risky proposition where you need to RMA it once or maybe more to get a good unit. That makes it hard for me to recommend, but I'm going to proceed with the rest of the review just in case this is a highly uncommon issue or for those that want to risk it. Response times are an interesting one. Acer do offer 3 overdrive settings, but disables the overdrive menu when running the monitor in the adaptive sync mode. As pretty much every PC gamer will enable adaptive sync through FreeSync or G-Sync, this means there's effectively just one overdrive setting, which is equivalent to the normal mode without VRR enabled. I wish companies wouldn't block the overdrive setting for no reason when adaptive sync is enabled, but it's not the first time I've seen that on an Acer monitor. The actual performance in the VRR mode is okay at 240Hz. We're seeing a 4.89 millisecond average response, a moderate to acceptable level of overshoot and inverse ghosting, with an average cumulative deviation result of 390. This is all pretty standard stuff for a modern IPS gaming monitor, not too slow, not heaps of overshoot, it's reasonable. Unfortunately, this level of optimization does not hold up well at all for lower refresh rates. 200Hz is okay, but by 165Hz there is noticeable, though somewhat faint inverse ghost trails behind moving objects. At 144Hz these artifacts are more noticeable, and at 120Hz they are very obvious, which should be expected from a 66% inverse ghosting rate and 26% average error rate. Sure, response times are in the 4 millisecond range, but these overshoot numbers are not good. At any refresh rate below 120Hz, inverse ghosting is extremely obvious, so for gaming around that 60 to 120Hz range, you can expect noticeable artifacts and issues. I'd say inverse ghosting is horrible at 60Hz. There's no way to fix this while preserving variable refresh rate support, and even if you do disable VRR, the only option is to turn overdrive off, which makes the monitor much slower. Unless you plan on gaming mostly right up at 240Hz, the experience here is not very good, definitely not single overdrive mode worthy despite being forced to a single mode. And it once again shows manufacturers that disabling overdrive and offering limited controls is not the solution for the best gaming performance. Compared to other monitors at their maximum refresh rate, the XV272U W2 is mid-table, coming in with around a 5 millisecond average response time and a mid-level inverse ghosting rate. The M27QX as a comparison point is faster but produces more overshoot. The MSI MAG274QRX goes the other way, slower with less overshoot. But unless we're looking at premium models such as the Asus XG27AQMR, most of the budget type 1440p monitors deliver a similar experience at their maximum refresh rate, balanced one way or the other. But it's average performance where this Acer monitor falls down. While it does have one of the faster average response times, it's let down significantly by very high levels of overshoot. For example, it's 2 milliseconds faster on average than the M27QX, but does so with a 3 times higher inverse ghosting rate, meaning the Acer model has artifacts where the Gigabyte often does not. It's just not very well balanced, pushing even more to the extreme overshoot end of the scale compared to the Acer XV273U GX we reviewed a while back. This affects cumulative deviation. The older GX model was 14% better in this metric, while the M27QX is 23% better. And remember, both models are relatively close at 240Hz, so the Acer model is really falling away badly at lower refreshes. A premium high refresh rate 1440p monitor like the XG27AQMR destroys the XV272U W2 with a 63% better result. As I mentioned before, where it becomes really hard to recommend this Acer monitor is at 120Hz and below. The level of inverse ghosting is far too high compared to other monitors, so we disabled VRR and set the overdrive setting to off for this fixed refresh testing. At 120Hz though, this just ends up with a slow result that's worse than most of its competitors, and it's really no different at 60Hz. I can't recommend this monitor for low refresh rate gaming like this. Input latency at 240Hz is decent with a processing delay below 0.5 milliseconds and a high refresh rate, so the monitor is responsive to use. Pretty similar latency to many of the other 240Hz monitors in this chart, no real issues here, and when gaming at that highest refresh rate in competitive games, it's a decent option. Power consumption is as expected. Among 27-inch monitors, we typically see usage between 22 and 27 watts, with this Acer falling in the middle. It is surprisingly quite a lot more efficient than the XV273U GX, so clearly Acer have revised something with the W2 to cut down that usage a fair bit, which is only a good thing. The XV272U W2 does support backlight strobing through Acer's VRB setting, which is only accessible when adaptive sync is disabled, and brightness controls are also disabled in this mode. There are two options, normal and extreme, of which extreme is dimmer but clearer. While clarity does improve using VRB, especially at lower refresh rates like 120Hz, there are still issues here like strobe crosstalk, a bit of blur at higher refreshes, and red fringing due to the type of backlight being used. Some people may find this mode useful, but to me it's not especially usable with the limitations and end quality. Next up is color performance, and despite being advertised as having 99% sRGB color space coverage, which usually indicates an sRGB only monitor, the XV272U W2 is actually wide gamut. We're not getting an overly amazing DCI-P3 result, but 91% does confirm some form of wide gamut backlight in use. However, it's not especially wide gamut with only 69% coverage of Rec 2020, a nice result and above an sRGB only monitor but below most of its competitors. Factory calibration, not great. Grayscale performance has a few issues, like the mild green-blue tint, incorrect gamma, and high-ish delta E's. There's also oversaturation out of the box as there's no gamut clamp enabled by default, and in fact no way to limit the gamut to sRGB at all. So saturation and color checker delta E averages are mediocre and not indicative of a monitor with much factory calibration going on. Compared to other monitors, this puts the W2 at a disadvantage. The M27QX, for example, is much better calibrated, as are many other 240Hz monitors, including the previous Acer model we looked at for grayscale. In color checker, the performance here isn't terrible and is limited by its color gamut, but still slightly behind the M27QX. The bigger issue with this display is the lack of an sRGB mode, so there's no way in hardware to significantly improve accuracy for regular SDR usage. Most competing monitors do offer an sRGB mode, even around this price point. The M27QX's mode is very good, the MAG274QRX is decent, and even the previous Acer model is okay. It's usually only the very cheapest 1440p monitors that emit this feature these days, so that's disappointing. When putting it through a full calibration in CalMan, it is possible to fix all of these issues and generate a usable software profile, but these profiles only work in some applications, so ideally you'd want to perform as much of the calibration as possible in hardware. Without something like an sRGB mode, there will be many applications where you will still see oversaturation. Patreon and Float Plan members can download the ICC profile we created for this review, although your mileage will vary as to how much impact this has on accuracy, as the profile is tuned for our unit. Maximum brightness is good, though typical of a 1440p gaming monitor at 438 nits. Most models these days are hitting 400 nits, which is very much sufficient for most types of user. Minimum brightness though was on the disappointing side at just 88 nits, so this isn't an ideal monitor for using in a dark room where you want to really turn the brightness right down. Native panel contrast is typical of an IPS monitor, so it slots right into the middle of the chart with a result of 1130:1. That's a good result and similar to the M27QX, but it won't blow you away with dark levels, as IPS LCDs typically have a poor contrast ratio relative to other technologies. You don't want to see a sub 1000:1 contrast ratio on an LCD, but still, it'd be nice to see some improvement here at some point, perhaps not with the budget model anytime soon though, but yeah, maybe in the future we'll get better black levels out of these screens. Viewing angles are about what you'd expect from this sort of IPS panel, which is to say they are good and allow for viewing at pretty much any angle you'd reasonably want to use. Uniformity was average and impacted by the backlight issue I talked about earlier. Occasionally the left section flickers or doesn't work correctly, which has an impact on results. I also saw some IPS glow here, more than usual for this type of panel. It's possible the panels being used here are not a premium bin, which again would sort of explain the price. Final section of this review is the Hub Essentials checklist, which looks to see if Acer are accurately advertising this monitor and meeting basic minimum performance standards. Acer immediately received a deduction for advertising HDMI 2.1, even though the HDMI ports do not include any HDMI 2.1 features and are functionally HDMI 2.0. They also stumble in not providing an sRGB mode, although other advertising either isn't present right now or is conservative, like the sRGB color space numbers. Motion performance is a mixed bag, as 0.5 millisecond response time is advertised but is a bit optimistic for real-world performance, and the lack of adjustable overdrive in the variable refresh mode is poor. HDR support is also practically non-existent. While you can turn on HDR, there is no local dimming whatsoever, so the mode looks bad and doesn't provide any contrast enhancement over SDR. My unit also experienced flickering, as discussed earlier, and firmware updates are not supported as there are no USB ports. The Acer Nitro XV272U W2 is a classic case of you get what you pay for. I paid $300 for this monitor, which is $100 cheaper than any other 1440p 240Hz IPS monitor I've seen or tested, and what I got was a rather mediocre experience that's worse than other options with similar specs. At its current asking price and apparent MSRP of $400 US, it's even harder to swallow, though still relatively affordable compared to other 240Hz monitors these days. There's a sizable list of issues with this monitor, headlined by poor quality control. My unit had an intermittent flickering backlight issue, which seems to also be an issue for someone else, judging by the reviews on Amazon. Based on this alone, I find it hard to recommend anyone buy it, because it could end up being a lottery as to whether you receive a good or bad unit, and RMAs are annoying. But I guess I should give Acer some benefit of the doubt, given I've only seen 2 examples these could be outliers. Even when dismissing the QC issues with my unit, it's still hard to recommend the XV272U W2. Response time performance is okay, the maximum 240Hz refresh rate, but is poor elsewhere and not really suitable for variable refresh gamers, especially playing below 120Hz. Overdrive cannot be tweaked in this mode, which is a baffling decision given how this has never been a better choice than allowing overdrive adjustment on any monitor I've ever tested. Acer needs to move beyond this and unlock as many options for gamers as they can. Factory calibration is also poor. While we do get a wide gamut panel, Acer didn't include an sRGB mode, so there are accuracy issues when viewing normal SDR content, and this can't be addressed using hardware settings. HDR is advertised, but hardware support for it through local dimming or high brightness is completely absent, and there's the issue of misleading HDMI 2.1 advertising as well. I can only really see this being a good product, if you can call it good, for people playing competitive games that want to stick as close to 240Hz as possible. The overdrive issues won't be as problematic for that sort of gamer, and the IPS panel does have some benefits like good viewing angles, great brightness, and a solid resolution, but even then I'd probably just buy something better for a similar price or cheaper, depending on what you're after. The big kicker here is the XV272U W2 is nowhere near as good as the Gigabyte M27QX, which used to occupy this $400 price point nicely. The M27QX has much better response time performance, better factory calibration, an sRGB mode, a KVM switch, accurately advertised HDMI, and fewer QC issues that I'm aware of. Unfortunately, it's not available right now, but it's safe to say this Acer model is not a suitable replacement, and I really hope Gigabyte have started to produce more M27QXs to meet demand, which I still believe is there. Even without the M27QX being available, I can't recommend people buy this. At $400, you are better off sacrificing refresh rate and buying a 1440p 165Hz-ish monitor with better performance all around. Check our latest buying guides for our recommendations there. If you really do want 240Hz, I'd look to push the budget a bit further and grab something without a bunch of fundamental flaws. This leaves the question of whether I got a good deal buying it for $300, and whether you should consider it if Acer decides to drop the price back to $300. It's certainly better than at $400, but I'd honestly prefer to use something like an MSI G274QPF-QD, even if that means sacrificing refresh rate down to 170Hz. There are other options too for around $300 that aren't 240Hz. I just don't think the upgrade to 240Hz is worth the other downsides even at $300. It's harsh, but I simply haven't been impressed with what I've seen. Anyway, that's it for this review. If you do appreciate our content like this and our reviews, then please do consider supporting us via Patreon or Floatplane. Your money does go to allowing us to buy monitors like this. I think someone in our Discord community, can't remember the name, sorry, pointed out that this product was available on Amazon at $300. I jumped on it, even though it cost me an extra $150 US in shipping to get it here. And yeah, a bit of a disappointing product that we can't really recommend, but that's life. And yeah, that's what our Patreon and FloatPay members support us to do, to test monitors that are cheap and maybe not worth buying. So thanks for all the support to people who do support us there. Otherwise, you can just subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and that's it. I'll catch you in the next one.